Hi, everyone who is joining. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. We'll just be giving it a minute or two for everyone to sign on, and then we will get started. It's always good to see the list of attendees as people sign on. It's like there are some people that are here for every webinar. Welcome back. There are some newbies as well that look like they're joining us for our first webinar, so welcome to you as well. Awesome. It looks like we've got quite a few people in now, so I will get started. Hello, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for the latest Intopia webinar. My name is Chris Pycroft. I'm a part of the Intopia team, and I will be your facilitator for today's webinar. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners across all of the lands that we're dialing in to participate from this webinar from today. I am dialing in from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I would like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are participating in today's webinar. Thank you very much for everyone coming along to today's webinar. The topic of today is accessibility overlays, friend or foe, which I think if you've had a look at the social media conversation about this webinar, everybody's leaning in a particular direction. Spoiler alert, you're all probably right, but we are going to have this conversation about overlays. I would first of all like to acknowledge our panel of presenters. We have Julie Grundy and Neil Jarvis, who are senior digital accessibility consultants of the Intopia team, as well as Stewart, who is our managing director and one of our co-founders. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar today, and we suspect that there will be a few based on the conversation already being had, please do use the Q&A feature that is available on your screen. We have some time left at the end to make sure that we get to as many of those questions as we possibly can. We'd like to acknowledge that this webinar is being live captioned, and a big thank you to AI Media for providing those live captions for us. If you do need to leave the webinar at any point, we will be putting up a recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel shortly after the event. If you keep a lookout on our social media pages, we will let you know when that is available. Or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notifications button, and that way you will be alerted as soon as the recording is ready to go. So today's topic, accessibility overlays, friend or foe. I think it's fair to say that there have been some pretty strong mixed reactions to overlays in recent times. There's definitely been a lot of discussion about them in the past year or two, and the role that they may or in fact may not play when it comes to providing holistic and user-friendly solutions when it comes to digital accessibility. So in today's webinar, we're going to provide a little bit of an overview of exactly what overlays are. And for context, we may be chopping and changing our language that we use throughout the webinar. Sometimes we'll be referring to things as overlays. Sometimes we'll also be referring to things as plugins, depending on the context of the conversation. So we'll be talking through that. We'll be talking about whether they play the right or potentially not so right role in accessible solutions. And Neil, as an everyday assistive technology user, I'm sure will not be holding back in what he thinks and feels in terms of what the user experience is like for users who are blind and need to use overlays or plugins. With that said, I might throw over to the first question, and Julie, this one is for you. Are you able to start by giving us a little bit of an overview of exactly what an accessibility overlay or plugin is?
Yes, I can. And I'm just going to share my screen. I just for people who are preference text. I just made a couple of little slides, but they're just pretty much saying what I'm about to say. So we're talking today about accessibility overlays, which, if you haven't heard the term before, is what people in the accessibility industry refer to as these kind of accessibility tools that you can put on a website. You install it on the website, and the intention is that it's going to change that website in some way that will help people with disabilities. And the format of those overlays is usually sold as a plugin, although there are variations on that. And that sort of, those variations is where we get these changes in terminology depending on which one we're talking about. But the kinds of changes that an overlay can make to your website, I'm looking for my, yes, slide change. What do? Once you put this plugin on your website, it can add assistive tools to your site. So things like it might add a high contrast toggle to your website, or it might add a font size changer, or it might give you a little button that will read aloud some of the content on the page. So there's a kind of, we tend to call those, again, within the accessibility industry, we tend to call those things widgets. And yeah, little widgets that people can use to make browsing the site easier. The other thing that an overlay or a plugin can do is sometimes they will actually change the code of the page to fix accessibility problems that are in the code. They are often, and particularly now that AI is the new hotness, everyone's going, our overlay does it with AI. But it doesn't require AI to do this. You can do it with plain scripting to kind of go through and modify the code. So that's just kind of to give people who are a bit not sure of what these terms mean. That's kind of what we'll all be talking about today, to sort of say, this is what we are on about, the topic of today.
And probably just add, Julie, I mean, we're going to be leaning more towards the overlay plugin versus the widget in conversation.
Yeah, because the widgets are, I think, an interesting one. Some of them are quite nice. And I think there's definitely a place for them. And they've been around for absolutely ages. Years and years and years, people have been having these without too much fuss, without too many problems. It's only recently that things have kind of gotten a bit out of hand.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Julie. I'm just going to quickly touch on a question that was mentioned in the Q&A feature. We're not necessarily going to be talking about specific examples of overlays or plugins ourselves, but just to provide a little bit of clarity, we've had Lindsay submit a question through Q&A that says, would use away count as an accessibility overlay? And yes, it does. So yeah, we're not necessarily going to be touching on specific examples much, but yes, that is the kind of thing that we are talking about in today's webinar.
Absolutely,
And we should clarify that in the case of use away, they actually have two versions. They have a what I'd almost call a dumb widget that just is what we're describing as widget, but they have an AI equivalent to that as well, which is what we call as an overlay.
And I think that's quite common now, is a lot of them are bringing out, like a lot of the ones that were widget only are starting to sort of say, oh, well, what if we added this? And some that started as the overlay only are now adding widgets. It's all getting quite complex. But yeah, if it's anything that's in that kind of zone, I would consider that fair game for this conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Next question, I'm actually going to pass this one over to you, Stewart. Why do you think website owners install accessibility overlays and plugins on their websites?
Yeah, there's a couple different angles and reasons why this is occurring. So if we look at it more from the context of the United States and the legal situation that's happening in the United States, where there's sites being sued regularly and not for legitimate reasons. So in the United States, we tend to see two types of lawsuits. We have a lawsuit where someone actually wants to enforce change for their rights, and they usually are done for positive, legitimate reasons. They're not about trying to get a cash return. It's all about they want the change for better, coming out of them. And then we get these lawsuits, which are really just ambulance chasers who are going around and trying to harass organizations to try to shake them down for funding and money and so forth. And that's tended to target a lot of small businesses and medium-sized business organizations. Now that market has been screaming out for some form of a solution that can help protect them. And so a lot of them don't have the budget, they believe, to invest towards improving their digital presence. And as a result, they're looking for a quick fix that helps give them a bit of a protective shield from these cases. I'll explain why that's a problem in a minute. On the other end of the spectrum, we have people who, and it's usually what I'm seeing outside the US market, people legitimately wanting to do the right thing. They have this belief that they want to try to create a better experience for their end users, and they see this really well marketed and sold tool, which is the saying, it's like one line of code, plug that in, it makes your website perfect and it's successful and all the rest. And there are people out there who really want to try to do the right thing, and they think that that's the method to trying to solve that problem. So that's sort of where I've been seeing the drive coming from those two directions. Now, both of them have created a bit of a problem from two different perspectives. The perspective, the legal one, is that, as Julie will touch on this probably in a second, I think in one of the future questions answers with Julie and Neil, is that generally speaking, they're not as effective as people would like to think they are. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And what we're now seeing in the US is that sites which actually put these overlays on their websites are becoming a red flag target for those legal firms to actually go, hold up, hello, we have an organization here who obviously knows that they don't have an accessible website, and they're trying to hide that by putting an overlay onto it to be a supposed quick fix. And that literally is just a red flag for those law firms who are doing shakedowns of customers and so forth. And so we've been seeing some stats showing that there's increasing lawsuits occurring that are directly related to websites which already had an overlay on them before the lawsuit was brought against the organization behind that sort of situation. But that's sort of where we're coming from, in the way of where it's what the driver is for a lot of organizations, is that they think it's a form of either protection, or they think it's a form of supporting them to do what they think is the right thing of meeting the needs of the disability community.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Stuart. Really, really appreciate it. And I think this is kind of a perfect segue for, I think, to get Neil for you to be a part of the conversation. I'm just kind of curious to learn from you, because obviously being an everyday assistive technology user yourself, and for us, we always like to make sure that we get feedback from users as often as we can in our work. I'm just kind of curious to learn from you, what's it been like from your perspective to use a website that has an accessibility overlay or plugin installed?
Pretty awful. If I start by saying that in addition to being an accessibility professional, which I have been for nigh on 3 decades, first and foremost, I'm a user of assistive technology. I'm a user of websites, and indeed the internet liberated me from not having access to so much information for the first half of my life. So when the internet came along, that was, and remains largely, a real liberating factor that has provided me access like I would never have believed when I was a child or a young adult. And for that, I wake up every morning and I think, isn't the internet marvelous? Because it is. However, that puts me in the situation of being someone who, if overlays actually worked, if they were what they say they are, I'd be banging on the door and saying, come on, let's have more of them. I want more accessibility. I want more websites to be accessible to me when they're not. And that is the promise that overlays give, is that they say, install our little harmless tool, which will do wonders for you. It'll stop you being sued, but more importantly, it'll give all these poor disabled people access to your amazing website. If it did that, I'd be saying, great, let's do it. But the story isn't really like that. The story is that, as Stewart has said, this is sold to organizations as a means of a quick fix. It's a means of solving a problem which we all recognize exists, that accessibility is hard, it takes work, it's not something that you can do in a day, and that's part of the problem. Accessibility, we always tell people in Intopia, accessibility is a journey. You start and you move along it, and you make incremental improvements as you go, and hopefully those improvements get bigger and bigger as time goes on. Overlays say to you, don't worry about any of that. That's way too hard and way too expensive. You don't need to spend money on that. Inject our little bit of code and you have got nirvana. So rather than go on a journey, they're giving you a teleport machine. Now, when I was a child, I was told if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And indeed, that is the case with overlays in my experience. If it's too good to be true, it most definitely is. I stopped believing in magic when I was about 7, maybe a bit younger. And I haven't started just because a few salespeople who want to convince people that they can make my life better have actually misled those organizations. So what is my experience? My experience has been that you start off from if you're doing anything, you start off from the position of, first, do no harm. Don't make it any worse than it already was. There's a lot of inaccessibility around on the web, on the internet, as we know. An overlay, the argument goes, will help to solve that problem. But surely the first aim is do no harm. Do not make it worse than it was. Well, overlays frequently do make it worse than it already was. They create an environment that is actually worse than the one that I originally found before an overlay was applied to the site and to the page. So therefore, that's a step backwards, not a step forward. It's not a move towards accessibility. It's a move away from it. Frequently, it's impossible to fill out forms, for example, that you need to fill out on the internet. You can't do that so easily with many of these overlays that are there. I was once in a situation where I was within minutes of being barred re-entry to my country, my home country, because the website I had to fill out, this was shortly after the pandemic was over, the website I had to fill out, the web form I had to fill out had a lovely overlay attached to it and was completely unusable to me. And if it had not been for the decency, human decency of a member of staff at Air New Zealand, I'll give them a plug, I would not have been allowed to board that plane. Whereas without that overlay being there, and we tested it later, it would have been fine. So thank you. That made my life a lot worse than it would have been, and it almost caused a severe level of mental stress. So I would say the next thing to think about is, all right, maybe there are some people who will benefit from these tools. I'm yet to actually meet one, but I'm sure there are some people out there who, we might be able to find one, and it'll be a good fun exercise to do. But any decent tool, any half decent tool that's there to improve things, gives you the ability to switch it on and to switch it off again. Overlays frequently don't do that. Sometimes it gives you the ability to switch them on, but you don't really know what you're switching on. It just says for accessibility or something like that, but it doesn't tell you what's going to happen if you click that button. And once you have clicked that button, you really can't unclick it. You can't then go back to where you were and say, no, this isn't for me. I'd rather not have this this layer of inaccessibility. Thank you very much. You actually are stuck with it unless you do a lot of work on your internet settings and cookies and all the rest of it. So even at that level, it's not a decent experience. You should be able to turn it off if it's not working for you. And probably the last thing I would say is in their ever increasing desire to be here, there and everywhere and be with me all the way, they track me across the internet. So having switched one on accidentally or unknowingly, and sometimes, as I say, you don't get the choice, I'm then tracked all over the internet by these tools so that they can switch themselves on again when I go to another site. That's like the Borg in Star Trek. I'm not happy. So yeah, my experience, Chris, as you asked the question, has not been a good one. It's been a very bad one. So in answer to the question, friend or foe, for me, they've been a real foe.
Yeah, thanks for that, Neil. Yeah, I don't think that's a surprise to many of the people who are tuning in today. And obviously it wouldn't be an Intopia webinar without a Star Trek, Star Wars reference. So well done to you for getting that one in.
Bingo.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, and if anyone does have any questions specifically for Neil or for any of our panelists, please do put them in through the Q&A feature, and we will have about 15 to 20 minutes left over for questions. So please do make sure that you get those in.
Can I actually ask a specific question of Neil?
Yes, please.
When you were specifically talking about that form that you couldn't access, what was the specific, what was wrong with the form that wasn't wrong with the form when you looked at it later with the widget on?
The form fields were impossible to ascertain. You couldn't actually, with a keyboard and the screen reader, you couldn't move between the different form fields, which is ironic. And even if you'd managed to, with a bit of jiggery pokery, land yourself into an edit field or what was supposed to be a drop-down box or whatever, you actually didn't know what the field was. For sometimes you did, sometimes you didn't. And as anybody who works in accessibility knows, one of the worst issues that you face is unpredictability. You're almost better if you know it's going to be bad, and you can design strategies to work around it. But if it's bad in some places and not so bad in other places, you're constantly on alert and trying to self-correct and all that sort of thing. So predominantly it was a inability to determine the fields that you were moving to, determine which fields you had to fill out, which ones were optional. But mostly you just didn't know what the fields were.
Wow. Oh, that sucks. And that's hard enough, as a sighted person, when you're sitting there looking at it and thinking, I don't even know what this form's for. I can't even imagine not being able to look at it and make a guess. And it has labels, but you can't get at them. Like that's awful.
I mean, there are regular problems that obviously we all know about in forms, in just generally without the overlay complexity.
I mean,
being added
no
to
one
it.
likes a form.
but and there are regular accessibility traps when it comes to those to forms. I mean, date pickers is one of our favorite ones that we talk about, and there are many others. But this was next level. I mean, I was quite impressed by how inaccessible they made it. I thought someone's put a lot of effort into this, because you can't get that lucky accidentally.
Unlucky.
I think it's somebody who really hated disabled people.
Thanks for that. Julie, I think this ties in very smoothly into the next question, which we have for you. So obviously we've heard from Neil from the user's perspective about how not so great overlays and plugins are. I'm just wondering if you can weigh in from a technical perspective. Why don't you think overlays or plugins work very well?
Yeah, I'd love to. And again, I've prepared some pictures because I am going to get a little techie, but it's so high level, you don't have to know code or anything. But if you do want to dig into the detail of what I'm about to talk about, overlayfactsheet.com has like more detail, but this is just kind of like a high level overview. So I'm going to share my screen again. And part of it is that the way that these plugins sit on your site is the source of this problem. So any website that you've got, you come up with a design and a layout, and you work out what features you're having, and then a developer pulls it all together and writes up the code and puts the pictures in, hopefully with some alt text and some good labels, but maybe not. You put that on a server, right? And then the website, you as a user, open up a browser and ask for a copy of that site from the server. Now, that's a standard kind of process before we do anything unusual to it. If we add one of these accessibility overlays, that is a plugin that sits on the server. It doesn't sit in the original materials of the site, it sits on the server, and it has to interact with what's in the browser. And the way it does that is it says, right, okay, the browser has asked for pages from the server. I am now going to look at those pages and I'm going to either rewrite the code or I'm going to add some widgets. And each time you, as a user, interact with that site, if you go to a new page, if you say set a date and that opens up a new part of the content on the page that wasn't there before, it has to go through and do that over and over again. And so you're just kind of churning through at the browser level. Quite apart from the accessibility problems, this also does have the potential to introduce performance problems as well, but you would have to speak to a performance expert about that. And part of the problem here is that what we're looking at is that it's ignoring the fact that, like Neil's coming to the table with his own assistive technology. He doesn't need a screen reader on just this one website. You need it everywhere, Neil. So you have it on your computer and on your phone so that you can use it everywhere. And so now you've got this interaction where everything's all kind of jumbled together in the browser. The browser is going like, I do not know what is happening here. I will just kind of do my best to cope with input and output from from the user, from the browser, from the server, from the plugin, from the assistive technology, and it all gets wild. The problem, and you may have spotted this already, is that the accessibility problems were introduced back when we were making the original materials, and we still haven't touched those. We're fiddling around on the surface without ever really touching the underlying problem. And the underlying problems are often unobserved and not known, but also you as the person who make the site, you knew what you meant. You're trying to communicate that to the person using the assistive technology. You're trying to say, this is a form that you need to fill in to enter the country. And you know what those form bits are for. You know why you're asking for those things. Plugin doesn't know that. Plugin doesn't have any information about why this site is, what it's for, what its purpose is. And so it has to guess. And this is, I think, particularly worse when we get to this sort of so-called AI code rewriting. It's rewriting your code, but it doesn't know why you wrote that code in the first place. And so it sort of says, well, I think this is a heading. And it's like, well, actually, it was a label, but all right. We'll just kind of cope with that. The tools, and this is why we sort of find that the widgets are not as bad, and people had accessibility plugin widgets for years before, with very few problems. I would also possibly say with very few people using them, because again, most people who need assistive technology already have it on their device. I do think there is a case for the widgets where we're sort of looking at target audiences who may not be tech literate. And so maybe having an assistive tool there in the browser to sort of say, hey, did you know that there are tools that can read things aloud for you? Might open up and they go, oh, I would like this everywhere. Actually, how do I get a hold of a screen reader and install that on my machine? That would be a lovely intro. Or for someone with low literacy or dyslexia who doesn't always need support, that sometimes needs support. Yeah, absolutely. But it's when we get to this kind of people with disabilities are using whatever tools and workarounds they've got all the time, not just when they're visiting your site. And so you kind of really need to sort of solve this problem at its core, rather than kind of fiddling around in the browser and mucking about with the code there. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think the consensus here is an accessibility overlay, plug in a friend or a foe. It sounds like we're all leaning towards foe. I'm just doing a quick,
Yeah,
just a slight
yeah,
hunch that we're
foe.
leaning towards
And
foe.
and like Neil, if they did what they said they did in the marketing, I would be so thrilled. I do not enjoy auditing and trying to tell people about alt text all the time. It is not a good use of my time. There are bigger and better accessibility problems that I would love to be working on. If there was a plugin that would fix all of that, like Neil, I would be saying to everybody, please use this plugin. Save us all a lot of hassle. I want these fixes to happen. I want things to be more accessible. But at the present moment, what they say they do and what they actually do are not the same thing. And so I come down on this foe. I'm like, no, until they get better, if they get better, call me again, but until then, no.
Julian, I think that's part of the problem of like friend or foe can be considered a very linear scale.
It's a very binary kind of thing. Yeah,
binary, but it's actually, there's this linear gray scale approach to it. And a lot of occasions, I think you're right. Like if these organizations had come out with these tools and said, we think this is a useful supportive tool that might make things a little bit better.
Yeah.
I don't think there'd ever have been as much negative pushback from the accessibility community towards the tools. The dilemma has been is that they've come out and some have started to change the language. So it's really interesting now to watch the adaptation of a lot of these organizations moving forward. There's been a number of walkbacks, but the walkbacks I still think are from a not the best of intent perspective.
Strategic retreat.
It's strategic retreat, yes. But like they all came out right from the beginning. They said, yeah, single line of code. We're gonna make your site ADA, American Disabilities Act, accessible from the beginning. It's going to be Section 508 in the US accessible. It's going to meet all the other standards in the world, WCAG 2.1, 2.2, 3, 4, 5, and everything else in the future. It's all going to just make everything perfect right from the beginning. And I think it's that malicious marketing, which would have come from one of two directions. One direction was, I honestly believe that some of these founders thought they were disrupting the industry and that they knew better than everybody else, and they could solve this using tech. I've been hearing that for 30 years in my career, how tech is going to solve all these problems, and it doesn't really ever truly solve problems. It works around the edges, but it's never an instant fix. But they came at it from an instant fix perspective. And they thought they were disrupting things, but they didn't truly understand what the hell they were doing to start off with, to truly then build something to maybe actually disrupt the reality that was there. And then there are others out there, and I honestly believe this is probably the majority of them. It's how can I make a quick fix? There's a market here. I can make money off of this. Small charge, large distribution, wide distribution of software, and make a bucket load off of that. What's fascinating, and I know a couple of questions have touched on this, is that we're seeing a couple of things happen at the moment with these companies. Some are walking back because they're realizing that this isn't working. The more ironic ones are the ones that have gone out there and gone, oh yeah, actually, well, it's our overlay combined with these now, this manual testing service offering that we now provide. It's like, well, hold up, you said it was a one's fix all scenario. Now you're saying, well, actually, no, you have this additional service offering. It's like, that doesn't compute.
Why do you need that if it's so good?
Yeah, if it's so good.
5 years saying that it wasn't needed in the first place.
Yeah. And I think the sad thing that we've seen is that we've seen a lot of these organizations grow off the back of a placebo effect solution, and they've made bucket loads of money off this. So I mean, honestly, this is in the hundreds of millions of dollars that they are making out of the community. And one of the biggest complaints we always hear from customers is there's not enough money or not enough budget to do things. And what we found is we've now had people spending hundreds of millions of dollars over a few years now on something that's placebo. It has no impact at all on end users. And what it's done is it's drained a very limited available cash out of the community to be able to actually make more productive and impactful changes to the betterment of the disability community. And I think that's, for me, is more the sad side of this, is that greed, and sometimes maybe there was an altruistic view of disruption and they thought tech could solve this, has led to this situation of it, as Neil touched on. It's actually not made things better. It's made things worse, not just from a user experience, but it's worse from a accessibility, disability community perspective, of that loss of funds that could have been used for more impactful outcomes.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that. And I'm actually I know we've got one more question that's left for the panel, but I do want to chime in with one of the questions which has come through in the Q&A, because it literally came up during that answer. And the question is, some of the overlay or widget companies also offer access to web accessibility consulting. What is your opinion on consultants who are recommending these solutions, given that some also have various certifications like the IAAP certifications? I'm going to throw that one open to the floor to anyone who wants to take it.
I'll jump in first. Just because someone has IAAP certification doesn't mean that their views or opinions are better or worse than anybody else. Like any industry sector, our community is very diverse. There are diverse opinions, diverse views, and diverse approaches towards what we all feel is the right way to solving the accessibility challenge that is out there. There are organizations like IAAP that are trying to become an association for all to be able to participate in. That all said, I generally refer to the accessibility community like any community I've ever worked in. I've worked in a couple different industries. There's always what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly in every community. And just because someone believes something does not necessarily mean it's the right thing. And we've seen this in our own situation when it comes to interpretation of things like with WCAG standards. Like, we know as a team, we had certain interpretations of success criteria for WCAG, which will differ from others in the community. So it doesn't surprise me that there will be others out there promoting it. I've not seen a lot of web accessibility consultants promoting the overlay plugin tools. I've seen a hell of a lot of digital agencies promoting it. And a lot of that promotion, again, comes from that same scenario of going, it makes them feel good or seem good, or they're making money in some way of a kickback from the overlay companies to self-promote. And every time you ever look at any of these rating platforms for software, and there's a number out there rating these different overlay products, it's very fascinating when you look at who's actually rating the products. The products aren't being rated by actual users for the user experience. The products being rated by digital agencies who go, yeah, this is a really cool product. I can just plug this in for my customers when I built them a website, and it was just so easy to do and so easy to buy.
The user experience of installing the plugin is lovely.
Yeah, but the user experience for using the website is not what's being ranked and classified. So that's my opinion of that question. Julie, Neil, I'm not sure if either of you have alternative views or additional things.
I would only add that accessibility, if you've been working in this industry for a while, it can get to be a bit depressing, the lack of headway that you make, and it is difficult, and people get burnt out and people start scrambling to find anything to make a difference. And so I have a bit of sympathy or empathy for people who are in that situation where they are just like, oh, please, just something, please. I get it. I think it's wrong, but I understand the impulse. But yeah, in the long run, it doesn't really help. And it's like, what's your goal? The overlays are not moving you closer to your goal, really. So
that's the only measure that counts, isn't it? What's the goal, and
yeah.
Are you getting anywhere near it? we all want world peace, but just because we haven't got it, we don't give up on it.
Exactly.
And we don't say to people that we can give you world peace by injecting some sort of code into your lives. I said it before, this is a process. It's not a once only fix. And if you've got an organization that has built its entire business model on selling a product that it says will disrupt the industry, will make sure that you never have to go anywhere near these pesky accessibility experts ever again. And then 5 years later, they turn around and become a service providing organization that provides the very consultancy services they were rubbishing for those 5 years. You have to wonder about their own faith in their product, let alone ours.
Completely fair. Thank you so much to all of you for that. If you do have any more questions, please do continue to submit them through the Q&A feature, because we'll be going to more of your questions shortly. But the last question, which I've got to all three of you panelists, and Stewart, I'm going to throw this one over to you first. If overlays or plugins aren't the right answer, and I'm definitely picking up that it's not necessarily the right answer, what would you recommend that alternatives be that people consider when trying to create an accessible solution?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's a funny thing in the sense that I look at I'm going to do a little commentary and then I'll go into distinctly the answer, but I found it fascinating. I've been in the community now for about 10 years. And in that 10 years, I've not been around as long as some. There have been definitely people who have been around for much longer than I have in the community. But me observing the community and observing what's happening, what I see with the overlay tools is not much different to what I was seeing with the automated testing tools from about 10 years ago, where again, they were trying to be a piece of technology that was going to solve everything and make it easier for everyone just to test everything instantly and get all the answers. And they shifted their language very quickly again as well, because it couldn't actually do that. At best, it's about 30 or 35% success criteria they will pick up on, and then the remainder can't be picked up on. So it's a holistic approach. So when I usually talk to customers, I talk about taking a holistic approach towards testing a website and using everything towards their strengths. And so holistic approach is usually three categories from my sense. Automated testing tools in some form are useful. They can obviously do a lot of testing really quickly and really fast, but sometimes not the best at interpreting what exactly the problem is. They'll basically say there's a problem here, but how exactly to deal with it sometimes can be really tricky to sort of interpret. But it's useful for the low-hanging fruit and the stuff that automation can pick up on. The next thing is that manual testing. There's still not a lot of there's no real replacement for manual testing in the sense that you need that expertise to be able to look through everything from a standards perspective as your baseline that you're trying to achieve. It's not the end point, it's the baseline, the starting point. And there's still too much that's left to human interpretation when it comes to our standards and best practices around how to make something accessible. But that's not the end either. And the end is really the third element, which is usability testing. It's actually involving real users as part of the process to get their feedback. We talk a lot about how something can be technically accessible, but does not necessarily mean that it's usable to the end user. And ultimately, if you look at any discrimination act around the world, it doesn't usually talk about a standard that needs to be met. It actually talks about, have you made the experience an equitable experience for everybody? And that's the trigger. And like, people focus too heavily sometimes on the standards because it's an easy thing to sort of aim for as a baseline or a benchmark. But they're forgetting the fact that ultimately the legislation out there is around that equitable access. And ultimately that's what we should be striving for, is to making an equitable access for everybody, so that it doesn't matter about the standards. It doesn't matter so much about accessibility. It matters that they can do what they need to do on a website or a digital product or whatever it's going to be. That's the end goal. And so the best chance of achieving that is what I lovingly, from a Harry Potter reference, I'll add in now, which is the Deathly Hallows of the three magical devices. In this scenario, the three magical devices is basically automated testing, manual testing, and usability testing. But Julie, I'll throw over to you because you are a practitioner, so you've got probably a
Yes.
better different
Yeah,
opinion
yeah.
on this.
And as someone whose job it is to do the manual testing, I would say to people who can't afford to get someone else to do their manual testing, if you are a business owner and you are like, well, I actually would like to make my site good for people with disabilities, I would be looking first at your tools that you're using to make the website. If you're using Shopify or WordPress or anything like that, any content management system, what are their accessibility standards? What are they applying? They should be providing you with a good accessible baseline to start with. And often they have support for that and documentation about that you can look up. And if you find that it's not good enough, tell them off. There is an accessible content creation standard called ATAG that they should be applying. You should, if you're using a tool to make your website, you should demand a good quality tool. And if you are wanting to do like automated testing, I love Axe, I love Google Lighthouse, they're all great. But if you wanted to try manual testing for yourself, Microsoft Insights, Accessibility Insights has a really good step through. You don't have to know what you're doing. It will just step you through. And if you find you have bigger problems than can be fixed with that, yeah, sure, come talk to us. But that gets you your, that's 2 of your 3 that Stewart just talked about. And then talk to your users. You don't have to know what every disabled person in the world thinks. You need to know what your customers want. And talk to them and say, hey, what problems are you having on the site? And prioritize fixing those. If it's not technically compliant to WCAG, okay, fine. But if your customers are able to do their tasks and so on, then great. That's the goal, really, is not, this technical compliance, but getting stuff done. So yeah, I'll kick over to you, Neil. What do you reckon?
Well, just building on what you've both said there, that ultimately, if I go back to the example we gave earlier of my near horrible experience of not being able to get back into the country, that was a relatively small form that we were talking about. It wasn't a large form. It wasn't trying to apply for a passport or anything like that. It was a reasonably short form, would under normal circumstances would have taken 10-15 minutes to fill in if I'd had a break for a cuppa halfway through. So an hour spent with testing with a variety of potential users would have saved a lot of grief and a lot of heartache that wouldn't have required a plugin or an overlay that didn't work. So that the importance of user testing is critical, even more so than the standards are there to help you. The guidelines are there to help you. They're not there to govern you. And I always think that's an important thing to remember. Your user experience should be what governs you. And then lastly, just reinforcing your earlier comment, Julie, about if you can't do it yourself, make sure the people that you're procuring your platforms from do. And a big part of accessibility isn't just what you do in your development cycle, important as that is. Also, it's the role of accessible procurement, and if you have policy in place and processes in place that mean that you ask the right questions of vendors, so that they are supplying you with a product that is fit for purpose, and there's lots of help out there, not least from us, about how to do that, then you'll be going a long way to making sure that you're keeping the requirements front and center from the people that you're buying product from.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, everybody. We have just under 10 minutes for questions. So we're going to try and fly through these. Bronwyn has very generously given us a very open-ended question. I think a lot of this has been touched on already, but I'm looking specifically at you, Neil, because you might have some opinions on this. Is there anything that we haven't mentioned about overlays and plugins that might make them potentially worse for users?
Well, it's a pretty low bar, isn't it? I mean, I think from certainly from my perspective, I think we've touched on the fact that they often make the situation worse than it already was. That is one of the critical things, that they don't produce the solution that they promised to produce. So they've basically lied when they've said that they'll solve all your problems and make inaccessibility go away. The fact that they are very intrusive and they follow you around, I mean, I think there's all sorts of areas where we're concerned about that in this day and age, around privacy, etc. But these are particularly aggressive with in that respect. So, you know, I touched on that in my comments, but probably not as strongly as I should have, because they are that to me is a real concern. So yeah, those are probably the main things. But literally, it's that old thing: if it's too good to be true, then it probably is. And unfortunately, they've been the loudest voice for the reasons that Stewart was talking about. Most of them were very, very heavily invested in by venture capitalist organizations who wanted to turn a quick buck. And in my view, that was the prime driver. Yes, there were certainly some people who probably wanted to make the world better and went about it the wrong way. But I think the majority of that was they wanted to make their world better rather than mine. And the very fact that what happened subsequently, when there was so much pushback, it's interesting how overlay companies tended to react. Most of them were very defensive, but also very aggressive towards the people who were pushing back, and they belittled them publicly. They went after them in all sorts of ways. They're very litigious organizations, so we're all being very careful what we say here today. But then a bit later on, we moved into the next phase, which was, oh my goodness me, we got it. Some of us got it a bit wrong. It wasn't our fault. It was our marketing people who are no longer with us. That was certainly a strong argument put forward by certainly one or two of the major providers. And to me, that was incredibly disingenuous, because if as the leader of an organization, you don't know what your own team is doing, which is what we were being asked to believe, then you're probably leading the wrong organization.
Final words.
I'll jump in here and say specifically, I just went to double check the privacy information, and I'll put the link here. It can ruin your compliance with particularly the European legislation around privacy. So if that's a factor for your business, that would be something to be aware of. I would actually love to make a little test site and then have Neil demo it with and without an overlay on, to kind of show, like, just to really show this is the difference, but without like casting blame on anyone who has one, or you know, as I said, like most of the businesses in Australia that I've seen with these are often businesses that I go to because they are ethical in other ways.
Yeah.
You know, sustainable clothing companies and stuff, and they're trying to do the right thing. People are trying to do the right thing, and it turns out that it's not working because they were sold a lie. And that, I'm a pretty sunshine and rainbows kind of person, but that makes me angry. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, you're trying to do the right thing. It should have been good.
Yeah. And thanks for that, Julie. I'll just get you to chuck that link just in general chat, because it looks like you've shared it with just us panelists. So do chuck that one from the overlay actually website. I'm just going to bring in Stewart here, because it ties in nicely with our next question that we've got. And I'm hoping I pronounce your name right. I believe it's Kazuhito, who is joining us from Japan. So thank you so much for joining us. They're asking if there's any kind of information available about the use of overlays or plugins specifically in Australia. Have we got kind of any idea of, like, public organizations, private companies? Is there any kind of numbers out there about companies that actually use them at the moment?
Nothing, no hard numbers, but anecdotally, what I've been seeing and what our team have been seeing in general is that it tends to be in smaller organizations, tends to be organizations who align to the disability community or not-for-profits that are trying to support the disability community. And as I touched on earlier, it's organizations who feel like they're trying to do the right thing, and they're looking at this as part of that solution. And I've heard comments on the odd occasion, people are going, oh, this is just my stepping stone. It's like, I'm just doing this in the short term while we make things better, for example, which unfortunately is a false approach to take, as we've been discussing with everything else. It's rare for us to see any large organizations or large corporates going down that path in the Australian community. So Australia's pretty well been isolated from, I think, the influx of these tools, but we are seeing them, but they're popping up in that scenario of people who had the right intentions who are just misguided, in my viewpoint.
Great.
And just adding to that, when you do see large organizations do it, like the example that I gave, which was actually a government organization, not in Australia, then that's usually because they're doing something very, very quickly and they're trying to get a quick fix to an immediate issue. But as we know, quick fixes often lead to slow disasters. So.
Thanks for that. Speaking of quick things, we've got very quickly time for one last question, and it's 30 seconds each for this one. You will need to make it quick. This question's come from Dom. How do you think the role of digital accessibility consultants will change if there's a rise of use of accessibility plugins on websites? Julie, I'm going to get you to start on this one.
Yeah, I'm going to say if there is a continuation of the rise, I think that the role will change with us being the cleanup crew. Coming along behind and sort of saying like, okay, now you had one of these plugins and it didn't do what it said it would. And now you've got customers saying, hey, I've got a problem. So we're going to have to do that. We're going to have to fix that up. So I could see that being if the rise continues. However, I am a little bit skeptical of it continuing to rise. I think as the proof gets out there that they aren't that great, I think this will end up being a bit more like what Stewart said, where at first everyone's like, automated testing is going to fix everything. Oh, it definitely fixes this one problem. So we'll use it for that. I think it will be the same. It will be like widget plugins serve a specific niche case and can do a really good job at that, and could be improved on. But long term, I don't see it really going beyond that. And I think we come back to the idea that technology is a tool. It can't do the work for you. It's not a magic wand that you can just sort of say, oh, let's sprinkle accessibility dust around. Ultimately, it's like, it's a tool to be used. And as we get new tools, we'll get excited about them and go, hey, awesome, it's going to change everything. And then we go, oh, no, we're still humans and we've still got human problems. And technology's just sort of added one more tool to the toolbox. So that's my long-term view. I'm not terribly worried about being put out of a job because of it. I do think the nature of the job will change, but that would happen with or without overlays.
Chris, I'm going to jump in after Julie because this reminds me of an anecdote, a conversation I've had with Andrew Arch. Andrew Arch started 30 years ago as an accessibility consultant in Australia. He was one of the original founders for the Vision Australia's consulting team. At the time, he had a manager say to him, going, well, what are you going to do in 5 years when all the technology has been built to be accessible? Now, 30 years later, we're still playing and needing accessibility consultants. We do not have enough people in the community to meet all the challenges that are out there. We've had that occur. We've had 10, 15 years ago, it's just automated testing tools are going to solve everything. Now it's overlay widgets and plugins are going to solve everything. It never does. So I actually don't think it's going to have any negative impact. It might adjust a little bit around the edges, around tools that might make our lives a little bit easier, but the lion's share, the bread and butter is still going to be there for consultants.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I agree with both the comments just made. I think that we've always had scenarios where there is going to be an upheaval and then the upheaval gets downgraded to a little bit of a tremor. I'm not particularly expecting this to be a major change in direction for accessibility. I do think there will be some changes in direction inevitably, and that's a good thing. And that's we welcome that as a profession. I think we welcome that. But I think the topic of overlays as they currently are, I think, is going to be a short-term one.
And I keep coming back to the idea, if I am wrong about this and it turns out that overlays are in fact going to fix everything and they are going to improve and solve it all, I am very happy to retire and drink cocktails on a beach. Not a problem. Please sign me up. I don't think it'll happen. I foresee a lot of work in my future, but I wouldn't mind being wrong. Oh, it'd be all right.
And on that very lovely note, we are pretty much bang on time, so we are going to call it there. Thank you so much, Stewart, Neil, and Julie, for being a part of today's discussion. Thank you to everyone who's joined us for the webinar. As mentioned, a recording of the webinar will be made available shortly on our YouTube channel, so make sure you either follow us on our social media or subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on your notifications so that you will know when it's ready. A big thank you to AI Media for providing captions for today's webinar. Just to give a little bit of a plug, our next webinar, we're actually going to be grown up and have external guests for a change. So we might need to behave ourselves for a bit. I'm not sure how well that's going to go, but we'll try and give it a go anyway. Our next webinar is going to be on navigating accessibility in tech, and that is going to feature Derek Featherstone from Salesforce. We're also going to have Elle Waters from Adobe join us for that webinar. So that one will be on Thursday, the 18th of April at 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. That is technically a change in time zone because we're going through daylight savings, starting, ending, wherever you are in the world. But we will have more information about that on our social media shortly. Thank you so much to everyone for joining. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our attendees, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Chris.